Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Love on Campus acknowledges that we meet on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage and beliefs and relationship with this land. We acknowledge that these lands are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today, and we extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations people.
Hello, welcome back to Love on Campus. I'm Amy Matthews and I'm here today with Kathleen Stanley.
Hello.
And Georgia Nichols.
Hello.
I'm going to have to mix that up next time. I feel like I always do it in that order.
Yeah, do we need to we could come up with a thing where you have to do a tagline every time.
That's right. Actually,
when you're not hosting too, that'll probably change. I feel like when we host, I won't be like, "Hi, I'm Amy Matthews."
Clockwise and very anti-clockwise. Anyway, welcome back. Today we're going to be focusing on one of the major elements of the romance narrative instead of all of them. So last week we talked about Pamela Regis's 8 essential elements of the romance, and today we're going to be focusing just on the one that everyone hyperfixates on, which is the ending. Yeah, and this is the one we just started getting into a nice little discussion at the end of the last episode about what makes a romance, and Kathleen and Georgia were having a little discussion about, what's the book called again?
You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty.
I did download it because of you guys, so I have read about 2 chapters. It's quite sexual, quite quick.
It does.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
It's got the spice.
It does, yeah, and we're going to be talking about spice a little bit on and off. So the final one in the elements of romance is the betrothal, which we no longer talk in those terms. Like, that is a very 19th century, early 20th century kind of way of thinking about romance. These days we think about the happily ever after or the happy for now. Yep. So what do you guys want from a good happy ending that came out dirtier than I meant it to?
That's a good question.
What do you want to feel right at the end?
Satisfied.
Again,
not appropriate to the I was like,
well, actually very appropriate.
We've gone very sexy.
I like smiling. Do you know my mother used to catch me when I was a teenager reading romance novels, because I was a teen like in the heyday of the like Joanna Lindsay era, Stephanie Lawrence, the real heyday of the old school romances.
The bodice rippers.
Yep. And she would always like come into the room and she's like, "What are you reading? You're smiling." And I'd be smiling like an idiot. And for me, that's the romance, is that you kind of can't wipe the grin off your face.
Yeah. Strangely, I don't associate that with the ending.
Oh, is that the meet cute, or is that the moment they...
Yeah, I associate like little moments throughout the book that make me feel giddy. Like, that's where the affect really gets me.
That's a good word. That is exactly the word,
no,
giddiness.
Giddy is the exact word. Like where I'm sitting in bed kicking my little feet going, "Oh my God." But like, strangely, I don't get that giddy feeling at the end of a book per se. I think I'm just happy to know that that all those giddy moments led up to something.
It's like nice, when you've like sat down on the couch at the end of a long day and you've got this nice sigh and you just feel so satisfied. You're like, oh, that's the end of it. I'm like, oh man, that was so nice. Like, I feel good now. Like, I'm so happy that ended well. Like I didn't know it was already going to end that way.
Can I throw out a controversial opinion?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I am very dissatisfied by most romance endings. There's only I would say a third of them where I'm like, that was great. And then like 2/3, I'm like, well, the third act kind of fell down.
Yeah, maybe that's my feeling. Maybe I don't have strong, like, sort of memories of really good endings that have really had an effect on me.
Because as a writer, I would say it's one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah.
Thinking
about my ending, I'm trying to make it feel, I don't know, dramatic. Maybe when I think affect and when I think ending, I think more movie.
Yeah, maybe, because rom-coms are really disappointing in the third act normally.
Yeah, maybe I think like running through the airport sort of ending thing, the grand gesture.
Yeah, yeah.
But,
the grand gesture
and then maybe
ending.
they're not as common in books. But that's also not really the case.
How about you, Kathleen?
Yeah, no, I agree. I know what you're saying, and I do agree to an extent that I think sometimes if it's too obvious,
Or predictable.
yeah, then, and you know, because you can have a happy ending and know where it's going, and it still doesn't feel like it's been done before. It's annoying when it feels like it's done before.
Oh, maybe it's not, because they're all, you know, there's only so many ways you can do it. And actually, it's not the predictability I mind. I think you're hitting on something there. It's the kind of lack of emotion that they're not quite hitting they're not making me feel it.
There's a sort of, oh God, I hate using this word lazy because it sounds like, because it's the last thing I think of writers is lazy, but there is a laziness to the
or maybe a comfortableness, like a not challenging yourself.
I think it's not challenging your character. So it's this thing where I feel that you can tell when an author has felt they've solved everything, as if romance solves everything about your character.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I think that the ending isn't about having everything solved. It's about finding the solution in somebody else to an extent, or finding somebody who's going to help you along with the solution.
Yes. I heavily agree with that.
More so than it having to be like, oh, everything's fixed and I'm perfect now.
Yeah, like I got my promotion and I realize I like him, and so now we can be together and it's fine. Yeah, that feels
so unsatisfying.
Yeah, that feels, I'm a bit like, oh, so like what is next? And maybe that's why this becomes such a heavy reliance on epilogues, because everything's neat and tidy, and then you're kind of like, well, where else would they go?
Well, so that's interesting, because last episode, Georgia, you were talking about how you liked the happy for now.
Yeah, I do.
And yeah, so maybe it's that idea of you don't want everything resolved. You just want to know that they're going to have each other's back.
Yeah.
And there's something interesting you said, Georgia, that I've been thinking about when you were talking about it, the marriage ending, and how there's a finality of that being the utmost, sort of like that hits the peak point of a romance. And for me, because I'm married, I think I found that marriage was in no way the peak of my
You'd hope not, or you'd just give up now.
I think a lot of people though do find, when they reflect, and especially because divorce rates are so high, they probably do think, I loved the person the most when I married them. But my husband, who is editing this podcast for us, thank you, darling, who is probably sitting here thinking she's talking about me. And
in glowing terms, Dean.
Yes, I'll be talking about you a lot, dear. Get used to it. And I say this a lot to people, Dean knows this already, but I fell more in love with Dean after we got married. Then, you know, when you get married, you think, oh, I love this person so much. And you definitely think you understand how much you're going to love that person. But for me, the most romantic thing about my real life was how much more I fell in love with my husband when he became my husband and after we were married. And I don't think people talk about that as much, and maybe some people don't feel it. But that's what I would like romances to do, is make me aware that no matter where the couple's going, their love is going to grow. Because that's the most special thing in my life, is the fact that my love grew with connection, commitment, and I knew that, you know, we were going to work on each other and help each other through everything that was going to come. And there was a promise in that moment that this wasn't going to be the most we would love each other. This wasn't going to be the moment that it's all downhill from here. Like, I hate when people say that about, it's all downhill from here. I'm sorry, if you're doing marriage the way I do it, it's all uphill from here.
But what's interesting here is you do have the marriage of convenience, or
the tropes.
Tropes where they start with the marriage, and then the high points come long afterwards.
Yeah. So I think that that's the thing about romance, right? Is that if we're ending feeling like everything is uphill from here, and that this maybe isn't the peak, like you were talking about, George, you want to know that there's more to come.
Yeah. If I think about how I'm writing at the moment, there's just, you can't tie up everything that's keeping them back from being in a relationship or making it difficult. What I want to achieve for the characters is their commitment to each other and their want to be together, and the fact that their relationship has movement and trajectory and a future.
Can I throw in a crazy example here?
Yeah.
So everyone knows Dirty Dancing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what an interesting moment, right? You've got this
Can
kid.
I just say before you tell this, controversially, I hate this movie.
That's fine.
Go.
That's
Go.
fine. I can still use it as an example.
You so can.
So at the end, what we've got is a kid who's 18 and this older guy. She's like wealthy Jewish New York, going off to college and then Peace Corps. He is working class, working summer jobs, painting for his uncle like during the year. Like they have polar different trajectories, and the film doesn't wrap it up with a happily ever after.
Oh, it doesn't at all, does it?
They just have a dance, and then it's like, what possible future could these two have?
Yeah.
They're in love, but how on earth is anything going to happen?
But you kind of still end on that affect of like, cool, that's good. I feel good.
See, I think that was my problem. Is I was
love
like,
it.
this is the peak. This is it.
I've never
They're
questioned
done.
it. I've never been like, well, they're not together.
But the happy for now thing, right? Like maybe happily ever after, it doesn't matter. Like if you have this great relationship and this great moment, the romance bit, I mean, this is where the ending gets interesting.
Yeah.
Is the value in the feeling and this wonderful joy of it, or does it have to last forever?
Yeah. And then I suppose, well, do we want to ever think that maybe they don't stay together forever?
No, it's too sad.
Yeah. But you just know that at least they're together now.
Yeah.
And that's good enough for the romance. That's why we...
Kathleen's very quiet. I think this is a problem. This is a problem for
Because I
Kathleen.
feel like that's veering into love story territory for
No,
you.
because
It's
the
not
love
a
story
problem.
shows the sad on the page.
Yeah. And we're just focusing on the romance of it.
I don't know if the love story always shows the Okay, so let's think about Nicholas Sparks.
Yep.
Love stories. Nicholas Sparks is not romance; he's love stories, right? Because
Tell us why.
they end tragically usually. The couples don't end up together. But then I think about a movie. I know he's a book writer, but I'm going to talk about the movie because I like the movie better. I'm going to talk about The Notebook.
Yeah.
And there is something terribly tragic and romantic and beautiful about The Notebook. And girls love it. It's always been this like stereotype, at least there was this huge stereotype in the early noughties, where, all girls loved The Notebook and they made their boyfriends watch it and it was blah, blah, blah. But
I know a lot of men who love romance, by the way,
yeah, definitely.
and who cry at the movies.
I'm talking about it more from like a cultural stereotyping
Yep.
that kind of happened around this movie, I feel, in particular. And in some senses, there is a satisfaction in the way that ends because they end in each other's arms.
Yeah.
They end together. And I think a lot of people get confused when you say that The Notebook is a love story, not a romance. Because if we're going to break it down, then sometimes the loose feeling of how do we know that they were together in some ways forever?
They had the best example of a happy long relationship.
Yeah.
So this is where I come back to affect, that a romance is about an experience of feeling and that you want to end. So Dirty Dancing, if we went to see their next 30 years like we do in The Notebook, I mean,
It would be less.
there are no happy endings, right? Like we all die and we all separate and things go wrong, but the romance ends on that lovely feeling.
Well, that's the thing about The Notebook. If it had ended
Yeah.
with
the kiss in the rain.
with the kiss in the rain and then them going to spend the rest of their life together, romance.
Yeah.
Like it would be romance. But the fact that weaved in is this idea that she has dementia and they die and all that sort of stuff, then it's not.
It's about
romance.
something
It's-
else, right?
yeah,
It's a different experience.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel sad at the end because she remembered and they were together and they loved each other so much and then they got to still die together. And I think that for me, there was still some satisfaction there. So it plays with this idea of, I think this is why for me, romance, the reason it's separate is because we need to think they're going to be together forever. Is because we don't want to see that messy ending. We don't want to have that messiness. Life is messy. We know we're all going to end up there. And I need a space I can go to where I don't have to deal with that. I don't have to think about that.
Yeah, because it's a non-troubled space. The idea is that it's a salve or it's a...
It's simply about the better moment.
And this is where I think I get a little itchy and antsy when people start talking about realism. I know that we
Oh, this is on my list for
yes,
today.
I had a feeling this would come
You're
up.
stealing my segue.
Sorry.
Do you want me to do my segue really bluntly?
Do your segue.
I'm good with it.
You've earned it. Go for it.
So basically I was going to say that Regis talks about how the ending is the reason why romance gets maligned a lot. And that there's two reasons for it. One is that the ending gets ridiculed, and I'll unpack that in a minute. And the second one is that it is considered to be unfeminist. So let's start with the first one, that it gets ridiculed for being unrealistic, which is there where my blunt segue comes in. So let's unpack this idea of realism and why does that mean that a romance should be criticised because it's unrealistic?
Well, I have one argument that the rhetoric mainly comes from men who don't want to do things like that.
But what's interesting, you gravitate towards realism though.
I do.
I think you make the strongest arguments for realism embedded in your romance.
I don't think that something being more aligned with what is realistic means that it's unromantic. Whereas I think the argument for realism is that it needs to be less romantic, which I don't agree with. I think that that romance can still be aspirational and achievable and hopeful, and that doesn't mean that it's unrealistic. It just means that you're not doing it, maybe. It just means that you're a bit, like you could, kiss your girlfriend in the rain if you really wanted to.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think that's a really interesting point because I would say this is like one of the number one criticisms we get, right?
Yep. And the most boring.
Yeah.
We hear it a lot.
I do genuinely think it is people being like, oh, it's just too hard to do that sort of stuff in a real relationship and everything else gets in the way. It's about...
But it's such a boring and lazy criticism of romance because we just don't do that with other genre fiction. Romance is genre fiction. Yeah. It's not meant to be...
It's not making claims of
it's
being
not literary.
Yeah.
It's not... What it's doing is not meant to be representing real life, and it's just it gets me so upset when
it's a bit like going to see a superhero film and saying that wasn't realistic.
Yeah. I'm like, of course we take the genre that's dominated by women, all round, writers, readers, publishers, everything, and we accuse them of not being friggin' real enough. Like, oh my gosh, how dare we have a genre that's based in emotions? Because, of course, women our whole lives are constantly told to moderate our emotions. We're far too emotional. Meanwhile, men are the number one domestic violence and aggressors on the planet. Like, men are literally the biggest threat to other men on the planet. But, of course, women are too emotional. And then we put an entire genre that's the biggest selling, highest, most popular style of writing in the world.
Yeah, so romance last year, I believe, was $1.5 billion.
And we tell it it's not real enough. Like, I'm sorry, I'm gonna bleep me out if you need, but get fucked.
Do you know
there's no room for it. We don't do this with horror. We don't do this with fantasy. Are you going to tell me that you looked at Lord of the Rings and went, oh God, it's not real enough?
But I think this is where what's interesting because so there's two arguments going on here that I think are overlapping here. So Georgia was saying that it does happen, that it is real, right? Yeah. Like people do get married every day. People do fall in love every day. People stay in love through incredible hardship, right? Through mental illness, physical illness, disaster, catastrophe, war. Like there are great love stories in the world happening every day. In really banal small ways and in really dramatic sweeping ways. So A, there is love and romance in the world, love, sex and romance in the world. But then B, as Kathleen is saying, that this is a genre that is not making claims of veracity. It's not saying it's mimetic form. But I think where people get confused is because it does happen in the world, right? So you're not necessarily going to walk down to the supermarket and see an orc or a dinosaur or a superhero. But you are going to walk down to the...
Crime happens all the time. And we don't really get crime this way.
Yeah, but you're not necessarily going to see it,
Yeah.
is what I mean. Whereas you will walk down to the supermarket and see people holding hands or on a date at the restaurant or in the cinema or people kissing in the Botanic Gardens on a sunny day. Or we love on campus, seeing a bunch of undergrads in springtime, there is a lot of coupling up going on. Yeah. So I think there's this confusion because you do see it every day. So there's this assumption it must be based in reality.
And I think we all feel entitled to it, right? Like we're all promised it. We're all told that you can have love, you can find love, you can partner up, that we're social beings and that love is an inherent human condition. So I think unlike crime, arguing against myself here, but unlike crime, we're not entitled to crime. Like crime is something that happens to us, and it may happen to us, and it happens to a lot of people every day. But we're kind of born into this world under the understanding that there are safe places and there is safety, and that crime might not ever happen to you. You might live your whole life without it. But we are kind of made to believe that we will always love someone, that we will, even if it's just a friend or a family member, or we're born from love. There's this idea that love is an entitlement that you're allowed to grasp and have, and everyone's supposed to have it.
So I guess what I'm saying is there's a cognitive dissonance going on where people are holding both thoughts in their head at once.
Yeah.
I don't think that romance is entirely a sort of fantasy space. I do think that there is space for more realism, and when I think about some of the relationships that you read in romance novels, I don't think that they're that fantastical, if you will.
Do you wonder if, just as Kathleen was talking there, and then when you said that, Georgia, I was thinking, is the realism about the fact that at the end of a book, if we're talking cis het, straight kind of romance, at the end, the woman is recognised and treated well and valued?
Yeah.
Is that what's unrealistic?
I honestly do think to a certain extent that, they have an equality in their relationship. They have an emotional recognition between each other. And I think to a certain extent that just seems a bit too
far-fetched.
Yeah. Yeah. They're like, whoa.
Are we heading into Catherine? Are we getting into Catherine Roach?
We're going to get to Catherine Roach.
I feel like we're heading there.
And whoa, God, he also gives her orgasms. You can't have all of that and, in one. That's what my mum talks about the most. My mum a lot of the time is like, why do they always orgasm all the time? And I'm like,
because that's the ideal. That's what we want to get to.
Isn't that what you want from sex?
He wants to read a book about a guy who doesn't know how to
I did have read some really great romances over the years, though, particularly the old historicals, where the guy is terrible at sex, and the whole point is he has to learn how to be better at it.
Yeah, male virgin things.
Oh,
they're
that seems
learning to please.
like it could sometimes be realistic.
Yeah, that's a different kind of ending.
Yeah,
but
right.
imagine a man who could take criticism in the bedroom and instruction. Oh my God!
Yeah. I mean, he listens to what to do and where to go, and what she likes,
and isn't threatened by that, and wants to come back for more and learn.
Isn't
what?
pornographic? Like all this. That's
some
funny.
Mrs. Robertson situation here.
So this idea of unrealistic, we're really sick of.
Yes,
because I do think even if it's not a total fantasy, it's got the colour turned up. Right?
Yes.
It's just a brighter than life version of things.
It's an aspirational, hopeful.
And it's a comedy, like generally a comedy, right? Romances fall under the genre of comedy. So most comedies aren't that realistic.
And I think the reality is like we've been talking about, it's dominated by women, and women are writing men if it's a het, or sometimes if it's another thing I like to call problematic and controversial, women writing male romances. Like, I'm sorry, as a woman, how can you stand in the mindset of two men now? But, reality is authors get to stand in all kinds of people's shoes all the time.
And that's a whole
other argument. I'm going to step away from that for a sec. Yeah. But, the reality is that women are writing men, and our fantasies about men, what we wish men would get when we're talking het romances, and sometimes not even het romances. But
if you compare the male fantasy of the woman versus the female fantasy of the man, they're very. But I would almost argue that the female fantasy is way more realistic. It is more realistic. It's more grounded, and it's not as, he washes the dishes, and
the bar is low.
Yeah, the bar is low. The bar is low, and yet somehow unreachable for someone. It is interesting
because it's about vulnerability, and I think that's the thing that connects us all: man, woman, sheep. We're
it's a different kind of romance.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just lightening the mood there. The reality is that everybody is scared to be vulnerable, and I think that maybe that's even what we're talking about with reality is people go, this isn't realistic because to be this vulnerable is something that I can't imagine being. It's something that is too scary. It's something that's horror-like. But you're telling me it's hopeful and it's wonderful and it's joyful. And how can something so scary be so good? Because if it was that easy, wouldn't everybody do it in real life all the time? Wouldn't people just fall in love and it be easy? And love is hard. Relationships are hard. They're hard work. Like I said, my marriage got more loving afterwards, but I'd never been harder work. So I think that's where maybe people get a little hung up on the reality is, if that's real, that means I have to do a hell of a lot of work.
Yeah.
And that's scary. That's really scary.
Yeah.
So let's move along to the second criticism. So the first one was that it gets ridiculed for being unrealistic. The second one is around the ending and feminist perspectives on the ending. So
The F word.
So obviously there are a huge range of feminisms from different historical points and contexts. So we don't want to lump them all together. So I'm really going to focus on kind of a second wave feminism perspective, because that was around when Regis was writing these 8 elements. She was really focusing on second wave feminist critiques of romance. And so we're thinking there was a massive boom in romance publishing around the same time as second wave feminism. So in the 70s, you had Kathleen Woodis's The Flame and the Flower as like the blockbuster of summer romance. Around the same time Jaws was for films. And it kind of spawned this huge industry. And what's interesting about this is there was a lot of criticism of romance about, and Germaine Greer said it was women cherishing the chains of their bondage, and that the fantasy of the romance was, again, bringing women back to the domestic sphere, to their relationship with men and ending with marriage. So we are really talking about that 20th century period of romance here rather than now, and we can pass those differences in a minute. But what do you think of those critiques that romance is about women sublimating themselves to men again?
I think that you can that there maybe are some romances that maybe are very aligned with this sort of patriarchal idea of forming relationships, but I think more often than not it's simply about a woman exploring her, I don't even know how to word this. With the Catherine Roach argument is essentially the idea that it's like a reparative sort of experience for them.
So those of you who don't know, Catherine Roach is a professor, I think she's still at New College at the University of Alabama, and she wrote a book called Happily Ever After, the popular romance story, or is it the romance story in popular culture? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I think so.
That was in 2016, but she's also published a lot of articles on romance. You can hear this is Catherine Roach is one we talk about a lot, the three of us, and we all come from different positions.
I mean that's her redeeming quality, the idea of it as a sort of reparative fantasy to like work through the...
I'm really interested in that idea that as a fantasy space we're working through in conscious and unconscious ways, like relationships between men and women, in straight men and women in a patriarchal culture, are a hot mess, right?
Yeah. I think that that's more what romance is about than like actively using it as some sort of propagandic machine to, sublimate them to their same gendered roles. I think it's more about them exploring their ability to have romance and a relationship and how that forms.
I also wonder whether some of the critics had never really read romances when they were...
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
I wish I had my notes. I have so many notes on like
I think
what feminism thinks of.
Well, I think one of the interesting things here too, and like you said, Amy, where a lot of this comes out of the second wave. So I think we've moved on.
I'm just going to put it out there, so we can state our positions. I am a feminist.
Yes, me too. but I do find that that means something different for a lot of people.
Yep.
And I do think that's okay. I don't think you have to say, you know, maybe you feel like the kind of feminism in second wave is really, it speaks to you so strongly. Maybe you don't. Maybe you find no definitions of feminism speak to you strongly, but that doesn't mean you don't want equality and equal rights and to just be generally respected as a woman or respect for women. I do think one of the problems I have with some of these older scholarship and these kind of discussions that come out of it is it still represents the domesticity of women as problematic, as if women also maybe don't like some aspects of it. And there's a lot of women who make the argument that whilst they maybe, yes, absolutely don't like the sublimation of patriarchy, that doesn't necessarily mean they don't like the domestic. And I think we sometimes use the word domestic interchangeably with patriarchy, and that's not what it is to me. And I don't necessarily think that that's a strong argument. And that's what I think was problematic about the way they used to look at these romances was, oh, it put you back in marriage and it put you at home. And I mean, some women love being mothers, some women love being at home, some women hate it. And all of them are correct and all of them are okay and nothing is a bad choice. You're allowed to feel however the hell you want about it. And the problem was that women didn't get the choice. And when you get the choice, if you want to be there, that's fine. Like, good for you. Power to you as long as you feel respected.
And we're hopefully getting to a point where all kinds of people can choose that.
Yes.
Not just women.
That's correct. And, you know, I think the problem I have with some of this older scholarship is it really problematized women who weren't doing and performing feminism correctly in a sense that they felt that women needed to be doing it all. And what does that even mean? Like, it's just very messy. And it tried to make it seem like it was black and white and unmessy. And it also really ignored the fact that that was, you know, this domesticity is really a privileged position. I think that in modern society, a lot of families can't afford women to just stay at home and just rely on male wages. And I think that that's been historically, some of these times, I think there'd be a lot of people of colour that would probably turn around and say, oh, well, I was working and still raising a family and doing all these things as a woman.
Working class women have always worked.
And and that not even just women of colour there. Sorry, I don't mean to categorise, but I do know that marginally they are the most discriminated in this way. And so I just look at it and think, what a weird take. Like, I guess that's probably my stepping away from it now, but I think what a weird take to be annoyed that women wanted to be mums or wanted to be married or wanted to...
Well, I guess since we're here in an academic environment too, and last episode we talked about thinking in draft, I think one really interesting thing about scholarship that I think a lot of people outside of universities don't think about, and a lot of students, it takes a long time for them to get their heads around, is that ideas are never fixed.
Yeah.
And so scholarship is about pushing the ideas, right? So you can't have the second wave without the first wave, and you can't have the third wave without the second wave, and we can't have the fourth wave without the third wave. That every movement just pushes the ideas a bit further. And so the danger is in getting fixed in ideas.
Yeah.
And with romance, it has not received sustained, rigorous analysis yet.
I think this is our argument for why this is a relevant topic now, is that 30 years ago we may have had a different positionality. We were in a different wave perhaps. And because life and the world moves and our relationships with each other move and our relationships with ourselves move.
We and our relationships with the ideal, right?
Yeah, we have to constantly re-examine. You know, this is the why is your academic argument relevant?
What I will say about the second wave, so much of it had to broadly look at sort of domestic structures and family structures,
and it was very white.
Yeah. And so they essentially, you know, Germaine Greer being an example, is she identified the nuclear family structure as inherently sexist, and then all of a sudden she'll go, well, that's what a lot of romance novels look at, and therefore they're sexist too. So it was like this, you know, it just didn't.
It ignored the journey, right?
Yeah, there was no connection between the two really, except for the fact that she tried to be relatively consistent with her argument, which she wasn't.
I also have to say, I think what's interesting is the way, and I think this is so common in sexism and other forms of oppression, the way the responsibility is pushed onto the individual writer in the book. Instead of going, well, actually, the society is sexist or racist or homophobic or insert oppression here. And what is happening in a book, like I know as a writer, you know you're inscribing things consciously, but then there's a lot of unconscious rubbish and good stuff that is coming to you through your culture. So to take a romance book and critique all of women's experience in feminism in this one book as though it bears the burden of inscribing the truth of stuff instead of being partly a mirror to society, partly an attempt to have a conversation or illustrate an idea, is I just find it really offensive and simplistic.
Which I suppose is what I'm trying to look at in my thesis, like this idea that the wave of specifically feminism and the cultural understanding of feminism nowadays, how does that inform our writing of romance novels? And ultimately, I'm not, when I write or when anyone in this current cultural climate is writing, they're not writing specifically to the political movements or the political ideas. Yeah. They're writing in the context of.
And in that push and pull between creating and reflecting.
And you do your best to, you know, be truthful to and your own perspectives and your own ideas, but that doesn't mean that you're necessarily imbuing them entirely in the romance novel.
Exactly. So when you read second wave feminism or, you know, books written in 1977, you have to be so conscious of their context.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that maybe some of these people who are making statements about romance weren't even doing in regards to romance, and that's why we have Regis to be so grateful for, because before Regis, it really was just about the ending. You know, the academic judgment on romance really wasn't looking at all the components and what it made up and what it was doing.
No, you're right. She was like analysing it as a formal, as a form of literature, right? And its formal structure.
The weight on the endings is so heavy because that's what the entire genre seems to be having to carry on its back, as if it's not doing so many other things. And talking about and working through so many issues and not finding solutions. It's not the point. And I think that's the thing, like it all comes back to the ending must be a solution. The ending must be an answer. Yeah. Instead of it maybe being the question mark. It's actually, are we putting finally a question mark here at the end and going, here's our question mark about hope and love and feelings and our relationships with men, women, whoever, people who define themselves outside of binaries. It's just this weight of a full stop that nobody in romance is trying to put there, but it seems to be like a reputation that it carries around, and that's something about the words happily ever after, and maybe that goes all the way back to fairy tales and childhood and Disney. Thanks, guys.
But that's where if you change it to happy for now, or just happy, ending happily.
Happy ending. I really just like the term happy ending. I like happy ending, and I, for my thesis, I talk about happy endings being marriage, engagement, or a declaration of love, because I don't like happy for now. I
really
implies that they'll not be happy later.
Happy for now feels too love story to me.
And the idea that it implies that they likely won't be happy later, I suppose.
Well, it's just, to me, it's just not what romance is doing. It's not for now. It's because it really still is eliminating a future then. It's still referencing something about the future that I don't think romance is trying to do.
I don't think it's eliminating it. I think it's sitting with uncertainty, which might be why it's resonating. I'm just going to spitball something really broad and generational again, but why it might resonate with Gen Z as well. Because, I
agree.
The divorce rate is 60% or something.
Yeah, I think people have less of a maybe even just less of a reliance on a relationship
And
being
maybe-
a through line of your lifetime.
Just to get really, really big and existential. Maybe also being a generation, during climate change and during a time of global instability again and a really rapid technological acceleration where you can't even imagine what the world will look like in 10 years. Maybe that what's the word?
How can you imagine being with someone,
Maybe there's just an ability to sit with the uncertainty of it. I don't know.
Yeah, this idea that if something is good now, you cherish it.
That's
now.
really sad.
I'm considering what you're saying.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I'm careful. My I don't know, maybe it's a millennial thing where I don't like to speak too broadly about my generation.
I don't think we should. I think it's a conceit we're doing on the show.
Yeah. But I mean, millennial women are having children later in life than ever before and all of these things. So I don't think that shifts. For me, generationally, if that's a representation, then I don't think millennial women necessarily feel differently about that when it comes to an ending in real life. And I don't think we're any differently aware of that. For me, it's really about what romance is trying to do, and that emotional feeling. And the reason I just find Happy for Now so resistant is because it's still it just feels like it's saying, well, this is for now, but I didn't read something thinking about the future. I'm actually just thinking about the way two people work through their problems and come together.
But there might be something, not to psychoanalyze anyone, but there might be something about certainty there and people who like certainty or not.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm a control freak. So
I personally hate certainty. I hate even having plans. Do you know what I mean?
Me too. I like the odd couple.
So
Guys, you're killing me.
the openness of a relation, of the trajectory of a relationship is maybe more appealing to me. Because I like that. I like the option to know that.
Oh my God, you guys are not millennials, and it shows we're all very anxious people. We need answers. We need assurances. I'm sorry. We like to stay at home with our beds.
I'm a Gen X. I'm just cynical about everything. So I think we're getting near the end. But I wanted to wrap up on a couple of fun notes. First of all, can you think, and this is, again, if I'm putting you on the spot, feel free to say pass, but can you think of a book you've read that had a really great ending that you loved?
Look, Emily Henry books always really do it for me, if I'm honest.
I really love it.
I really like her endings. And I actually did really like The Love Hypothesis. I'm probably not remembering it well. But
no, you don't have, if you loved it, if you have that memory.
I just remember knowing that, relationship-wise, their relationship was in a good place and their careers were being considered and things like that, and I did enjoy that. But Emily Henry is particularly the standout.
Yeah, she's my standout the last few years. Really amazing.
Her epilogues are always
Beth
good.
O'Leary as well, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe Beth O'Leary for me more than Emily Henry, even though I adore Emily Henry, and Book Lovers was probably one of my favourite romances of all time. But I actually think I didn't love Book Lovers' ending because I felt it was a bit rushed. And I think she answered it by giving us an epilogue, which I think epilogue endings, I'm always like, you're cheating. Just give me that feeling before then. But I don't hate an epilogue either. I don't know if I can think. I'm going to walk away from the mic and go, I know what it was.
Yeah, no, bring it next time.
People we meet on vacation specifically, I was really kind of shocked with that ending, but in a good way. They kind of were together and living in New York, but maybe they were also living somewhere else and they were happy. And I was like, I'm not even sure definitively what's really happened here. But I like it.
And that is the feeling we want at the ending. Yeah. I like it.
Yeah.
So just a reminder to everyone that if you want to follow along with our book club, the book we're reading at the moment is Ali Hazelwood's Love on the Brain. Mm-hmm. And in a couple of weeks' time, we will be diving into that book.
And I haven't finished it yet to be able to talk about the ending. What if that's my favourite?
It could be. It could be. It's a great book so far.
Maybe I'll put it in as a placeholder and then in the book club, I'll confirm.
You can always follow along with which books we're reading as well on the Instagram, which is just Love on Campus Podcast.
Woo-hoo. And we will be back next week. I think we're talking about subgenres next week, I believe.
Yeah, I think we're talking enemies to lovers.
Are we?
I think so.
No,
that's tropes.
No, we're talking tropes.
We're talking acca
Oh no, I
romance.
got ahead of ourselves.
It's okay, I'm hosting next week. So
I'm hosting
luckily Georgia is not hosting acca romance.
I'm hosting enemies to lovers. That's where my mind is.
So next week, you not only get us, but you get the whole topic on academic romance. So thanks for joining us. See you next time, Georgia.
What? Sorry?
Just say bye.
Oh. She doesn't want it to end.
I'm like, what? Bye, guys.
See you, Kathleen.
Bye, Georgia and Amy. Maybe not Georgia. Maybe Georgia is staying. Bye, Amy.
I'm really confused.
I'm definitely going home now.
Yeah, me too.
We will see you next week. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.